By the morning before my wedding, I had solved 3 hotel room disputes, replaced a florist's missing refrigeration unit, and rearranged the documentary crew's transportation so they could film the ceremony without blocking the road to the estate. Adrian had solved none of those problems. He was in the library with Paige, supposedly reviewing final notes for the streaming platform deal. They need updated audience projections before Monday, he told me when I found them sitting beside a table covered with laptops and coffee cups. We're trying to make sure nothing delays the transfer. The transfer. He had started calling it that as if the $18 million agreement were already complete. It was not. Into the Burn had taken 6 years of my life. I had begun the documentary after interviewing families displaced by the Northridge wildfire, then expanded it into a series about survivors, firefighters, emergency dispatchers, and towns rebuilding after disasters that disappeared from national attention. I had found the first participants, secured their releases, raised the initial funding, and spent months sleeping in borrowed rooms while filming interviews no network wanted to finance. Adrian joined the project during its 4th year as an episodic director. Paige arrived even later. I had recommended her as the on-camera host because she was intelligent, composed, and unusually good at making frightened people forget the lens between them. When the trailer gained attention, the 3 of us became the public face of the series. But the work beneath that image remained mine. The streaming platform knew it. Its legal department had made the terms clear. The deal could not close without my chain of title confirmation, my copyright assignment, and the participant releases held through my production entity. Adrian had reminded me about the documents at least 6 times that week. "Did you put the signature packet in your carry-on?" he asked. "It's in my locked case." "Good. We can sign Monday morning and take good news with us on the honeymoon." I looked at Paige. She was opening a foil packet of antacid and placing 2 tablets beside Adrian's coffee. "You shouldn't take those until you've eaten," she told him. "Your prescription already irritates your stomach." He reached for them anyway. "I'm fine. You said that in Toronto, and then you spent the night curled up on the bathroom floor." I had not known he had been sick in Toronto. Before I could ask, Paige turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Sorry. Occupational habit. I've had to keep him functioning through too many location shoots." Adrian laughed. "She remembers everything." Apparently, she also remembered that he preferred his coffee with a small amount of oat milk, that his medication belonged in the inside pocket of his camera bag, and that the hotel had placed him in the wrong type of room. "I had them move you away from the elevator," she said. "The noise kept you awake in Denver." "Thank God." I stood between them holding a folder of revised guest transportation schedules. For months, every moment that made me uncomfortable had arrived with a reasonable explanation attached. They traveled together because they worked together. They ate late because production days ran long. Paige knew his routines because a host and director needed to anticipate each other. Whenever I noticed how easily they moved around one another, I reminded myself that I had created their partnership. Suspicion felt ugly when trust had a more generous explanation. So I returned to the ballroom and finished preparing the wedding Adrian kept telling people we had planned together. That evening, the rehearsal dinner took place beneath strings of lights overlooking the Hudson River. The vineyard below the estate had turned copper with autumn, and the air smelled of wood smoke and apples. For 20 minutes, I believed the weekend might still become what I had wanted. Then Adrian's best man announced a couples game. He gave us 2 small boards and seated us back to back while the guests shouted questions. Adrian and I were supposed to write our answers separately, then turn around and compare them. The first question was simple. "How does Claire take her coffee?" I wrote black, no sugar. Adrian wrote 2 sugars. Laughter moved through the tent. "She has been drinking it black for 7 years, my sister said." Adrian grinned. "Not when we first met." "Yes, when we first met." "Then I'm remembering somebody else." He meant it as a joke. Across the table, Paige lowered her wineglass. The next question asked for my greatest fear. I wrote enclosed spaces. Adrian wrote fire. The guests laughed again because I had spent 6 years documenting wildfires. "I'm not afraid of fire," I said. "You nearly passed out during the warehouse shoot," he reminded me. "Because the emergency door jammed." I had told him the story more than once. When I was 19, a subway train had stopped in a tunnel after an electrical fire filled 2 cars with smoke. The darkness had not frightened me. The sealed doors had. Adrian shrugged. Close enough. It was not close enough to me. He named Paris as my favorite city, although I had always loved Santa Fe. He said that when I was stressed, I went silent and organized cupboards. I went for long walks. Paige organized cupboards. I knew because she had once rearranged an entire rental kitchen during a difficult shoot in Vancouver. By the 4th wrong answer, the game had stopped feeling harmless. Then the best man asked whether either of us knew which nut Paige was allergic to. It was not supposed to be part of the couple's game. Someone had noticed the pastry staff removing one dessert and shouted the question as a joke. Hazelnuts, Adrian answered immediately. Paige looked up. The best man whistled. Okay. What perfume does she wear? Orange blossom and cedar. More laughter. What does she order when she's drunk? Truffle fries with too much Parmesan. Paige pressed her lips together, but she was smiling. My sister was no longer laughing. One of the camera assistants called out the final question. What song does Paige listen to when she can't sleep? Adrian did not hesitate. Northern Sky. The acoustic version. The answer landed differently. It was too specific. Too intimate. Not the kind of detail one absorbed while directing an interview or sharing an airport shuttle. Paige recovered first. We spent 14 months traveling together, she said. Everyone on that crew knows far too much about everyone else. No one on the crew knows Claire takes her coffee black, my sister replied. Adrian set down his board. Can we not turn a silly game into an interrogation? His voice was light, but his eyes were on me. I had not said anything. That was how it always happened. He anticipated my hurt, described it as unreasonable, then expected me to defend a reaction I had not yet expressed. Later, outside the tent, I asked him why he knew what Paige listened to in bed, but could not remember the fear I had explained to him for years. She listens to music on overnight flights, he said. You said when she can't sleep. Because she can't sleep on planes. And the perfume? I have a nose. The food. We've been drunk in the same cities. Every answer was possible by itself. Together, they formed something neither of them would name. You were searching for a problem the night before our wedding, he said. Do you understand how exhausting that is? I asked 4 questions. You're keeping score against a woman whose husband died. Andrew had been gone for 3 years. Paige had worn her grief publicly and beautifully, turning it into speeches about resilience that helped make her valuable to Into the Burn. I had never asked Adrian to stop supporting her. I had only started wondering why supporting Paige required him to make me doubt myself. Do not manufacture a conflict now, he said. We have a wedding tomorrow and an $18 million contract on Monday. He kissed my forehead and went back inside before I could answer. The next afternoon, I stood in a bridal suite while 2 women adjusted my veil and a production assistant asked whether I was ready for the Blindfold reveal. The documentary crew had offered to film a short wedding feature for us. Their idea was simple. Adrian would be blindfolded, several women wearing similar ivory shawls would stand in a row, and he would identify his bride by touching only their hands. It was supposed to be romantic. After the rehearsal dinner, it felt like a test I had never agreed to take. I almost refused. Then Adrian entered the courtyard laughing as the photographer covered his eyes, and every person around me behaved as if there could be only one outcome. So I took my place in the line. There were 6 of us, my sister, 2 bridesmaids, Paige, a producer, and me. Adrian started at the opposite end. The guests gathered behind the cameras, offering playful warnings not to choose the wrong woman. He touched my sister's fingers and immediately moved on. He held one bridesmaid's hands long enough to make everyone laugh. I was 4th. His palms closed around mine. For 1 second, I thought he would recognize the ring he had placed on my finger or the small callus along my right thumb from years of holding a camera rig. Instead, he released me. No, he said. 1 quiet syllable. Then he reached Paige. His thumb moved beneath hers and stopped over a thin scar near the base of her hand. Paige tapped twice against his palm. The motion was tiny, instinctive, a reply to something already familiar. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers. I would know this hand anywhere. No one laughed. The photographer slowly removed his blindfold. Adrian looked at Paige. He did not let go immediately. For a moment, neither of them remembered that I was standing 3 feet away in a wedding dress. Then Paige pulled her hand back. "The scar," she said too quickly. He recognized the scar from a location accident. The photographer attempted to rescue the scene. "Hands are too difficult. Let's do voices. This one will be easier." A curtain near the garden entrance became a makeshift screen. 3 of us stood behind it and were instructed to say the same line, "I'll meet you at the end of the aisle." I spoke second. Adrian chose the third voice. "That's Pip," he said confidently. "I'm sure." Paige stepped from behind the curtain. The courtyard went silent. I had never heard the name Pip. Adrian's face changed as he realized he had said it aloud. Paige looked toward the cameras. "An old production nickname," she explained. No one asked what it meant. I turned to the lead camera operator. "Keep everything." She blinked. "Of course." The unedited footage. Every camera angle, the original audio, and the timecode. Do not delete or trim anything. Adrian stepped toward me. "Claire, don't make this worse." I looked at the hand that had passed over mine without recognition. "I haven't made anything." He and Paige left the courtyard through the side corridor. I assumed they were going to coordinate another explanation. 10 minutes later, Maya, the production sound mixer, entered the bridal suite and closed the door behind her. Her face had lost all color. "Claire, Adrian is still wearing his wireless microphone." I stopped removing the pins from my veil. "Is it transmitting?" She nodded. "I heard something you need to hear. It's not just personal." They mentioned the rights transfer. Maya placed her monitoring headphones over my ears. At first, I heard footsteps and a door closing. Then Paige spoke. "I have been sleeping with you for 11 months. How long do you expect me to stand beside her and smile?" Every part of me became still. Adrian lowered his voice, but the microphone sat beneath his lapel. "You need to hold it together until Monday." She almost figured it out in front of everyone. She hasn't figured out anything. She told them to preserve the footage. That doesn't matter. Get her through the vows. Once Claire signs the chain of title papers, the money clears. A pause followed. Then Paige asked, "What happens when she discovers the new company? Or the revised proposal?" "She can withdraw the participant authorization. She won't destroy her marriage and her own series over one mistake." "One mistake? You know what I mean." "No, I know what you told the platform. That after the wedding, you would control her vote." "I said we would make decisions as a family. You said becoming your wife would make her stop fighting the restructuring." Adrian exhaled. "By Monday, she will have stood in front of 200 people and promised to build a life with me. She is not going to burn it down 48 hours later." The recording continued, but I removed the headphones. Maya reached toward the receiver. "I can make you a copy." "Not a clip." She looked at me. "I need the complete file from the moment his transmitter activated. Include the original timestamp, recorder identification, channel information, and checksum. Preserve the source card." "You think this will become evidence?" "I think 2 people discussing an affair and an unauthorized copyright transfer have already made it evidence." While Maya exported the recording, I opened my laptop. I was still the legal administrator of the project's production portal. I did not break into Adrian's account or search his personal messages. I reviewed access records and materials stored in the company workspace I owned. The first log showed that Adrian had downloaded every unreleased master file at 2:13 that morning. The second showed a new proposal uploaded by Paige. My name had been removed from the first page. Claire Morgan, creator and executive producer, had become Claire Morgan, consulting producer. Adrian and Paige were listed as co-founders of Ember House Media, a company registered 4 months earlier. The revised budget routed licensing payments, sequel options, and international adaptation rights through Ember House. An attached representation letter stated that I had agreed to assign my controlling copyright interest after my marriage to Adrian. I had agreed to nothing. One email in the project file contained Adrian's assurance to the platform's business affairs team. Claire remains emotionally attached to being identified as the sole creator. Once we are married, she will be more comfortable allowing me to manage the commercial side on behalf of our household. He had translated my authorship into emotion and his theft into marriage. I called my copyright attorney. She told me exactly what to preserve and warned me not to alter existing records. Under her direction, I exported the access logs, generated authenticated copies, suspended download permissions, and sent a litigation hold notice to the project team. Then I contacted the platform's business affairs attorney. There is an unresolved chain of title dispute, I said. I have not authorized the transfer described in the revised proposal. Without your executed documents, the transaction cannot close, she replied. We will suspend Monday's signing pending review. By the time the musicians began the prelude, the master files were protected, the deal was paused, and Adrian still believed I was upstairs deciding whether to forgive him. I put my veil back on. My sister asked if I wanted to leave through the kitchen. No. You don't owe those people an explanation. I don't owe Adrian the privacy he intended to use as protection. I walked toward the ceremony. The guests rose when the doors opened. Adrian stood beneath an arch of white roses, looking relieved. He thought my arrival meant consent. I stopped at the back of the aisle. Please sit down, I said. The music ended unevenly. Adrian left the altar and took one step toward me. Claire, whatever you think you heard. I heard enough. And I preserved the rest. At my signal, Maya connected the production feed to the screens intended for our wedding film. I played the blindfold footage first. The guests watched Adrian release my hands, find Paige's scar, receive her two-tap signal, and say he would know that hand anywhere. They heard him identify her voice and call her Pip. Then I played less than a minute of the corridor recording. I did not broadcast every detail of the affair. I did not humiliate myself by turning 11 months of deception into entertainment. I played only what was necessary. Paige admitting the affair. Adrian instructing her to get me through the vows. His statement that once I signed the chain of title papers, the money would clear. When the recording stopped, Paige was standing near the first row with both hands pressed against her stomach. Adrian looked around as if one of the guests might rescue him. This is not what it sounds like, he said. It sounds like you plan to use our marriage to obtain my copyright. We were protecting the series. You created a company behind my back. Because you refused to think commercially. You removed my creator credit. It was a positioning document. You promised rights you do not own. His face hardened. There are dozens of people depending on this deal. Editors, producers, researchers, survivors who trusted us. You are destroying an $18 million project because of a private mistake. There it was. My work held in front of me like a hostage. If I refuse to be robbed, I said, you will call me selfish. If I expose you, you will say I hurt the crew. If I protect the series, you will claim that proves I should still sign. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you counted on. I looked at the guests, the crew, and the estate employees who had spent 2 days building a celebration for a marriage that had never existed in the form they were shown. The platform has paused the transaction. The project has not been cancelled. No one's work has been erased. Its ownership will be reviewed before anyone signs anything. Adrian's expression broke. You contacted the platform? I am the copyright holder. That is what you forgot. Claire, please. We can discuss this privately. You planned it privately. The wedding was the pressure you intended to apply in public. I removed my engagement ring. I am not destroying a deal. I am refusing to sign away 6 years of work to 2 people who thought a wedding dress would make me easier to control. I placed the ring on the table holding our marriage license. The wedding is cancelled. The dinner, hotel rooms, and scheduled transportation are still paid for. The staff will receive full payment. No guest or worker will carry the cost of what Adrian and Paige chose to do. He stared at the ring. You're throwing away our entire life. No. I am finally separating my life from the contract you wanted it to become. Paige began crying silently. I felt nothing triumphant when I looked at her. Victory would have meant discovering the truth before they had spent 11 months proving how completely they could deceive me. Adrian reached for my hand. I stepped back. You did not need me as a wife, I told him. You needed my name on your contract. Then I turned away from the aisle I had organized, the flowers I had chosen, and the man who had believed my love would make me easier to erase. He had known Paige with his eyes closed. By the time I took off my ring, mine were finally open. The first edited video appeared online before the estate staff had finished removing the white roses. It began with me standing at the back of the aisle in my wedding dress. There was no blindfold game. No footage of Adrian passing over my hands and choosing Paige's. No private nickname. No recording of Paige admitting that she had been sleeping with him for 11 months. The clip showed only the moment I announced that the platform had suspended the $18 million transaction, followed by Adrian asking whether I understood how many people depended on the project. Then it cut to me removing my ring. By the following morning, the video had a title: Jealous Bride Destroys Landmark Documentary After Groom Falls for Its Star. The account that posted it claimed to have received the footage from a wedding guest. 2 hours later, Paige shared it with a statement about the danger of allowing one person to control stories that belonged to an entire community. Adrian gave his first interview that afternoon. He sat beside Paige in the same hotel library where they had spent the day before our wedding discussing how to obtain my signature. Neither of them wore wedding clothes. Paige appeared without makeup, and Adrian kept one hand over hers as if they were survivors of something I had done to them. We never intended to hurt Claire, he said. Paige and I developed feelings during years of emotionally demanding work. We tried to deny them because we respected Claire and the project. 11 months became developed feelings. A plan to transfer my copyright became respect. He said I had always struggled with Paige's visibility as the host of Into the Burn. According to him, I resented that audiences connected with her even though I had personally recommended her for the role. Paige lowered her eyes before delivering the sentence that appeared in nearly every headline. The series was supposed to honor women who ran toward fires. It should never have become a weapon in one woman's personal pain. Neither of them mentioned that the woman they were describing had found the subjects, filmed the first interviews, obtained the releases, and created the series before either of them joined it. They said the platform agreement could have changed lives. They mentioned editors, assistants, researchers, and the families whose stories would have reached millions of viewers. They did not mention Ember House Media. They did not mention the proposal that erased my creator credit. They did not mention Adrian telling the platform that marriage would make me easier to manage. Their version traveled faster than evidence ever could. By the end of the week, strangers were calling me a bitter bride, a failed filmmaker, and a rich woman throwing a tantrum over another woman's success. People who had never read a licensing agreement explained that documentaries belong to the public once they became important enough. Several relatives called to suggest that I complete the transfer first and settle the personal issue later. My aunt spoke as if she were offering practical advice. You can still leave him, she said. Just sign whatever the platform needs so the crew doesn't suffer. He tried to take ownership of my work. I understand that you're hurt. This is not a synonym for hurt. There are $18 million involved, Claire. Yes, that is why they wanted the signature. Even my former mentor urged me to consider how the dispute would affect the women in the documentary. Finish the project, he said. Then fight over the credits. If I had been a man whose business partner had created a secret company and promised away his copyright, no one would have asked whether refusing to sign made him emotional. Because I had worn a wedding dress when I discovered it, theft had become heartbreak, and heartbreak was something the public expected women to endure quietly. My attorney and I issued one statement. Ownership, participant authorization, and use of the recorded materials are undergoing independent legal review. No unreleased footage may be copied, distributed, edited, exhibited, or licensed without the required approvals. We did not release Adrian's microphone recording. We did not publish the internal proposal. Most importantly, I did not upload private interviews from Into the Burn to prove that the project was mine. Some of the strongest footage involved women describing the worst hours of their lives. One firefighter had spoken about failing to reach a trapped family before a roof collapsed. Another had described identifying a colleague by the inscription inside a damaged helmet. A third had never told her children that she still slept on the floor during thunderstorms because a bed made her feel unable to move quickly enough. Those confessions could have shifted public sympathy toward me. They were not mine to spend. While strangers demanded that I prove I cared about the women in the series, I began calling those women one by one. I did not send a general email written by a publicist. I called each participant personally and explained what had happened, including the affair, the unauthorized proposal, the suspended transaction, and Adrian's claim that he possessed independent rights as a director. Then I gave each woman 3 choices. She could withdraw any unused footage where her original agreement allowed withdrawal. She could suspend permission until the ownership review ended. Or she could continue participating under a new independent oversight process in which no producer, including me, could make unilateral decisions about sensitive material. I'm not asking you to defend me publicly, I told them. I'm asking what you want done with your story. Some withdrew immediately. Some wanted time. Most chose suspension. Captain Elena Ruiz, whose team had rescued 23 residents from a nursing home during the Canyon Creek fire, remained silent for several seconds after I finished explaining. Did Adrian really say you'd stop objecting after you became his wife? Yes. And Paige knew. She was part of the conversation. Elena exhaled slowly. I trusted the project because you sat in my kitchen for 6 hours before you ever turned on a camera. That does not obligate you to stay. I know. That's why I'm staying. She refused interview requests about the dispute. So did the other core participants. Their silence was interpreted online as proof that they sided with Adrian, but I would not ask them to expose personal details to repair my reputation. The crew presented a different problem. Editors, camera assistants, researchers, and sound technicians had already completed work. Some were freelancers who could not wait for a court to determine who owed them money. I used the remaining funds in my production account to pay approved invoices for completed work. I deferred my own fees and negotiated installment plans with 2 vendors. The money I had saved for a honeymoon and a larger apartment disappeared within 3 weeks. Adrian paid no one. Instead, he filed a joint creator claim asserting that his direction, structural revisions, and field production gave him an ownership interest in the finished series and the underlying footage. My attorney considered the claim weak. Adrian had been hired under a directing agreement that assigned his production contributions to my company. But weak claims still required responses, document review, and money. The platform froze the project until ownership and participant permissions could be resolved. Then clients began leaving. A museum postponed a short film commission because its board did not want to become involved in reputational uncertainty. A nonprofit hired another producer after someone warned its director that I was difficult to collaborate with. A branded content agency stopped answering my emails 2 days after requesting a proposal. Within New York's documentary community, I acquired a new description. Complicated. Adrian had an affair, created a secret company, and promised away rights he did not own. I became complicated for objecting. For 3 months, I woke each morning and measured my life by the damage. Legal invoices. Cancelled contracts. New articles. Another clipped video. Another person explaining that if I truly... The emergency motion was filed 48 hours after the festival announced Into the Burn, First Light. Adrian's attorneys called it an attempt to suppress a completed documentary. His publicist called it revenge. Paige posted that powerful women should not be allowed to silence stories simply because their personal lives had become painful. None of them addressed the ownership records. My motion did not ask the court to prevent the firefighters' stories from ever being shown. It asked for a temporary injunction against one specific film assembled from footage copied without authorization and submitted under false credits. There was a difference between protecting a story and stealing it. The Great Lakes Documentary Festival suspended the screening pending review. Its legal department gave both sides a deadline to submit chain of title documents, participant releases, production contracts, and proof of ownership. Adrian gave an interview outside the festival theater. Claire wants to punish me for falling in love with someone else, he said. Unfortunately, she is willing to punish every firefighter in the film too. Reporters began calling open frame before the interview finished airing. I declined every request. There was nothing I could say in a 5-minute segment that would be stronger than 6 years of dated records. I built the evidence timeline myself. My attorneys handled the filings, legal arguments, and communications with the court. I organized the history of the project because I was the only person who knew where every version had begun. Maya delivered the original audio card from Adrian's wireless microphone in a sealed evidence bag. She included the recorder logs, transmitter assignment, channel number, activation time, and checksum created when she first copied the file. Elena, Marisol, and the other affected participants submitted sworn declarations describing exactly what they had authorized and what they had not. None of them was asked to defend my character. They were asked only to establish the truth about their own footage. The hearing took place 6 days before the rescheduled festival screening. Adrian entered the courtroom with Paige beside him and 3 attorneys carrying matching document cases. They looked composed enough for a photograph. Paige wore the same restrained expression she had used in every public statement about grief, love, and forgiveness. I brought 13 numbered evidence binders. The first contained the original proposal for Into the Burn, written 6 years earlier. Its working title had been After the Sirens. The document included my treatment, episode structure, research questions, proposed subjects, and a handwritten note about following communities after national attention disappeared. The file metadata showed when I created it. The copyright registration was in my name. The second binder contained the earliest production schedules, budgets, grant applications, interview notes, and location plans. They documented 2 years of work completed before Adrian joined the project. The third held the participant agreements. Each principal subject had authorized Claire Morgan Productions to record and use her interview under defined editorial and distribution conditions. Several agreements required additional approval before sensitive material could be transferred, sublicensed, or substantially recontextualized. None named Ember House Media. None gave Adrian personal ownership. None allowed Paige to submit the material to a festival. The fourth binder contained Adrian's contract. He had joined the project during its 4th year as an episodic director hired to supervise supplemental interviews, location footage, and selected reconstructions. The agreement identified all pre-existing footage, research, treatments, and participant relationships as property controlled by my production company. It also contained a work-for-hire clause. Adrian had been paid for every completed episode covered by the contract. His attorney argued that the film had evolved significantly because of Adrian's creative contributions. That may support his right to receive the directing credit specified in his contract, my attorney replied. It does not transfer ownership of footage created before his involvement or grant him the right to copy and distribute the project's master archive. The next records came from the streaming platform. Its proposed $18 million agreement required my signature as creator, copyright holder, and authorized representative of the production entity. The platform had never treated Adrian as the person capable of transferring the project. There was no ambiguity in the signature pages. Without me, there was no deal. Then came the server logs. At 2:13 on the morning of our wedding, Adrian's authorized production account had begun downloading the master archive. The transfer continued for 47 minutes and included unreleased interviews, original camera files, audio sessions, project documents, and private participant materials. His account had permission to access certain files for editing. It did not have permission to duplicate the entire archive for another company. The device identifier matched his production laptop. The destination path included the name Ember House. Adrian leaned toward one of his attorneys when that record appeared on the screen. The attorney asked whether other team members had downloaded large amounts of footage during production. Yes, the digital forensics specialist replied. But those transfers were connected to registered editing systems and documented assignments. This archive was copied to a previously undisclosed location hours before Ms. Morgan was expected to sign a rights transfer. The next document was the revised proposal Paige had uploaded. My credit had been changed from creator and executive producer to consulting producer. Adrian and Paige were identified as co-founders of Ember House Media. Licensing payments, adaptation rights, sequel options, and future seasons were routed through their company. The proposal had been created 4 months before the wedding. Their company registration records were older still. They had not built Ember House after falling unexpectedly in love. They had built it while Adrian was asking me about honeymoon flights, guest lists, and the location of my signature packet. Then we reached the emails. Adrian had told the platform that I remained emotionally attached to my creator status. He promised that marriage would make me more comfortable, allowing him to manage the commercial rights on behalf of our household. Paige had been copied on one version. In another message, she warned him that several participant agreements could not be transferred without my approval. He replied that I would not risk the wedding, the cruise jobs, and the platform money by refusing once the ceremony had taken place. They knew I had to sign. They knew I had not agreed. They created a plan based on making refusal emotionally and publicly expensive. Adrian testified that the emails reflected ordinary negotiation strategy. I believed Claire intended to share control after we married, he said. Did she ever state that in writing? My attorney asked. No. Did she state it verbally? We discussed building a future together. That was not the question. Adrian looked toward me. We were going to be husband and wife. Our professional and personal lives were already intertwined. So your position is that agreeing to marry you indicated an intention to transfer her copyright? I believed we would make those decisions together. But you had already represented to the platform that she would transfer control. I was optimistic. You created a separate company with Paige Mercer and routed Ms. Morgan's future licensing income through it. Was that also optimism? His attorney objected before he could answer. Paige's testimony was more careful. She admitted uploading the revised proposal, but said she believed Adrian had authority to reorganize the project. She acknowledged that I had selected her as host and had supported her career for years. I thought Claire wanted me to help carry the series forward, she said. I did, I replied when it was my turn to testify. I invited her to appear in the work. I did not give her ownership of it. Paige lowered her eyes. I treated her like family. That did not transform my copyright into family property. Being allowed in front of the camera does not mean you own what it records. Being welcomed like a sister does not give you the right to erase the sister who opened the door. The final evidence was the corridor recording. The full file began long before Adrian and Paige entered the room and continued after they left. The audio was continuous. There were no unexplained gaps, edits, or changes in recorder channel. The court heard Paige admit the affair. It heard Adrian instruct her to keep me calm until I completed the vows and signed the chain of title documents. It heard Paige mention the new company, the revised proposal, and the risk that I could withdraw participant authorization. Most importantly, it heard Adrian say that once I had stood before 200 people and promised to build a life with him, I would not destroy the marriage 48 hours later by refusing the transfer. The recording did not show that I had misunderstood him. It showed that he had understood me. He knew I felt responsible for the crew. He knew I protected participants even at personal cost. He knew I would be ashamed to cancel a wedding publicly. He had converted every decent thing he knew about me into pressure. The independent digital audit completed the chain. File identifiers from the festival version matched my unreleased masters. Several sequences retained the original project structure I had created years before Adrian joined the production. The source files contained my camera metadata, initial timestamps, edit markers, and internal naming system. The audit also recovered revision histories showing that my creator credit had been deliberately replaced. Paige had access documents identifying the limits on participant authorization before submitting the film. Adrian had downloaded the archive while knowing the streaming agreement still required my signature. Neither could reasonably claim that they believed Ember House owned the project. The evidence showed that I had suspended access only after discovering the unauthorized proposal and planned transfer. My actions on the wedding day were consistent with both the production contracts and my obligations to the participants. I had not destroyed a valid deal. I had stopped people who lacked authority from completing one. The court maintained the injunction and prohibited exhibition or distribution of Into the Burn, First Light pending final resolution of the ownership claims. The festival removed the film from its program that afternoon. Its statement did not call Adrian a thief or describe me as vindicated. It simply said that the submission had failed to establish clear rights to the underlying material. That was enough. The streaming platform terminated all discussions with Ember House and publicly confirmed that no transaction involving Into the Burn had ever become valid without my executed authorization. Reporters waited outside the courthouse. For nearly a year, Adrian and Paige had called their relationship a love story because love made betrayal sound inevitable and theft sound secondary. I stopped once at the bottom of the steps. They called this a love story because that sounded better than admitting they needed my signature. Then I left before anyone could turn the sentence into another debate about whether I looked angry enough. The final settlement came months later. Adrian was ordered to pay damages for unauthorized use of protected material and a portion of my legal expenses. The amount was significant, but it did not ruin him. It reflected the cost of what he had copied, submitted, and misrepresented. His commercial agency ended its relationship with him. The festival barred him from resubmitting any project connected to the disputed material and required additional rights verification for future entries. Paige lost the hosting contracts that had depended on the documentary's release. Networks did not announce that they were punishing her. They simply stopped trusting the story she was selling about herself. Ember House closed before the end of the year. Without my footage, participant relationships, production systems, or legal rights, it had no viable project. The original platform offer expired permanently. Adrian and Paige stayed together through the settlement negotiations. Afterward, photographs of them disappeared from their public accounts. Former crew members said they fought over money, blame, and who had promised what. Their marriage did not collapse because the universe had decided to punish them. It collapsed because both of them had entered it expecting to profit from a third person's labor. Once I was gone, they were left with each other, and all the responsibilities they had assumed I would continue carrying. Paige came to open frame on a rainy afternoon. Nia asked whether I wanted her removed. No, I said. I'll speak to her. Paige stood beneath the faded studio sign with wet hair and no camera waiting to record her tears. I was jealous of you, she said after we entered the editing room. Not only because of Adrian. People trusted you. Every room changed when you walked into it because everyone knew you had done the work. You could have done the work too. I wanted what you had already built. She admitted that Adrian had promised the wedding would solve everything. He told her I would be furious, then practical. I would protect the project, forgive the affair eventually, and find a way to repair the public damage. You always forgave me, she said. I always prevented your choices from costing you what they should have. She asked whether she could work at Open Frame. She said she would begin at the bottom, help with research, and prove that she could change. Then she asked whether we could ever become sisters again. You do not miss your sister, I told her. You miss the woman who kept turning your mistakes into opportunities. Her face tightened. I am sorry. I believe you are sorry now. Isn't that worth anything? It is worth letting go of the hatred. It is not the same as restoring trust. I did not forgive her in the way she wanted. I did not punish her either. I opened the door and she understood that the conversation was over. Adrian found me several weeks later after an open frame workshop. He looked older, though perhaps he had only lost the confidence that once made every expression appear intentional. I finally understand what I lost, he said. You lost a lawsuit. I lost you. He said he had confused pressure, ambition, and proximity with love. He said Paige had been an escape from the demands of our shared life. He said losing everything had forced him to recognize that I had been the person he truly loved. Do you love me? I asked, or do you miss the name that made people trust you? His mouth opened. No answer came. I had loved him. Refusing to return did not require pretending otherwise. My love had been real even if the future he offered me was not. I hope you eventually become someone who can answer that honestly, I said. But you will not practice on me. 1 year later, Into the Burn began again. I did not return to the original platform or search for another $18 million offer. The firefighters and I formed a copyright and ethics committee with equal authority over sensitive material. Each participant could approve the scope of her involvement, review how her testimony was used, and withdraw footage that no longer felt safe. We financed the project through public media grants, educational distribution, community partnerships, and smaller licensing agreements that did not require surrendering control. It took longer. It also belonged to the people who had created it. Open Frame hosted the premiere in a restored community theater in Chicago. There was no red carpet. Firefighters sat beside editors, camera operators, librarians, students, and families whose stories had helped keep the studio alive. When the final image faded, the credits began. Every firefighter appeared under the name she had chosen. Then came the researchers, photographers, sound recordists, production assistants, translators, editors, and community advisors. Maya's name filled the screen. Nia's followed. At the end came mine. Claire Morgan, creator and director. I did not need the audience to stand, though they did. I needed only to see that no one had disappeared to make room for someone else. There was no new man waiting beside me, no romance offered as proof that I remained lovable. My life did not require another relationship to certify that leaving Adrian had been the right choice. I had my work, my name, and the right to decide what happened to both. He knew Paige with his eyes closed. I had spent years closing mine. Taking my name back was how I finally opened them.